What have you made of the US-China relationship since President Trump took over the White House once again?
It's in a bad place, and it suffers from enormous contradictions. And the central contradiction is that at a high level, at a strategic level, there is an almost complete absence of trust. So each side thinks the very worst of the other side. China thinks that the United States is out to throttle its development, kill its economy. The US thinks that China is out to expel the United States from Asia. So they're competitors. They are rivals. In some ways, they are adversaries. We had a Pentagon official in Australia the other day saying to the effect that we'd be lucky to get through to the 2030s without conflict with China. So that's where we are. That's Elbridge Colby, who is in charge of policy at the Pentagon. So that's where we are at a strategic level. And yet, these two economies are joined at the hip. And that is what we have discovered from the two of them slugging it out in this trade war.
How so?
So it starts off as a tariff war. And by the way, I think that China has completely outplayed the Trump administration on trade in this episode. It starts off with tariffs, and Trump escalates. Starts off, I can't even remember, it was 50%, and then ratchets all the way up to 145%. China, no country is supposed to hit back at this. You're not supposed to take your revenge on the Trump administration. You're supposed to suck it up. China didn't. Went toe-to-toe, went up to 125%, which is more or less prohibitive, right? So now we have a mutual trade blockade. And the U.S. caved. They completely caved, right? So they went to Geneva, took off most of the tariffs, unwound them. We got back to roughly 30%, 20% fentanyl, 10% baseline, plus legacy, 20%. That's what. However, that wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it was this supply chain war. And the U.S. completely underestimated China on this one. So you had Scott Bessent, an incredibly sophisticated investor, ran his own hedge fund in New York. He's saying at the beginning of all this, we have all the cards, right? So if they export 5 times as much to us as we export to them, we've got the cards. He used this poker analogy. He said, they're sitting at the table and playing with a pair of twos, right? So
they might have all the cards, but they don't have all the rare earths.
Well, that's exactly right. So they flip the cards, and it turns out that China's got a couple of aces, right? So and one of them, the most important one is rare earths. And so now they start, hurling thunderbolts at each other, right? This is a war of the worlds. This is supply chain. So, China says to the okay, we're gonna close down your defense sector, and they can do that, right? They control the permanent magnets, and the US says, okay, fine, we're going to stop the sale of jet engines to you. So we're going to close down your entire civilian airliner program. China says, fine, we'll close your auto industry down, right? And actually, Ford had to close down a factory in Michigan. So this is how that was far more consequential. Got to the point where both sides recoiled from this. It was going to do enormous damage, both to their own economies, and of course to the global economy, since the two of them combined are about 50% of global GDP. That is where we are now. We are at a truce. Trump thinks he has a deal. Doesn't have a deal at all. He has a truce. But I do think we're starting to see the beginnings of what might look like some kind of negotiated settlement. We saw part of that today with the decision to allow NVIDIA chips, H20 chips, into China. The Trump administration had actually banned those chips. So there could be something to play for in terms of lifting some of the sanctions on technology in exchange for rare earths. But then again, that's only getting back to the status quo, right?
If you put this in a kind of game theory context, you say that China has outplayed the US when it comes to the tariff dispute thus far. But is there an argument to be made that by playing the rare earths card and restricting the supply of rare earths, China has actually woken much of the so-called Western world up to the supply chain issue you identify? So the Europeans and the Americans, for example, are saying, right, we have to move with immediacy to ensure that actually we aren't reliant on the Chinese in the future for this rare earth supply?
You're absolutely right, and this is now a kind of a warp speed moment for the United States, and you're going to see a lot of money going into the production of rare earths magazines. You're already starting to see it. It takes time, right? So this is not an overnight solution by any means. The other problem that the US has is that you're much better off, if you want to go up against China, you're much better off doing it in a coalition with allies, right? So, and this is part of the underestimation that, and I don't think that Trump or Bessent went into these talks understanding it, or a figure like Peter Navarro, who's all for decoupling the economy, said that China's industrial base is the United States plus Germany plus Japan, plus South Korea, and then some, right? So, it is literally the case that if part of the rationale for the tariffs is to reshore manufacturing to the United States, there is actually no reindustrialization of America without China. If Apple wanted to move its production of iPhones to the if it was possible, which I don't think it is, if it was possible, they would have to take Chinese-made equipment, machinery with them. So it's not just rare earths.
Yeah.
China is a global manufacturing Goliath. America may be the financial superpower. China is the manufacturing superpower, and that gives it an incredible base on which to build the technologies of the future, where China is now running away with it in many areas. I think China gets a bad rap when it comes to the Belt and Road. I mean, and this all starts with India, with his analyst, and he's talked about debt trap diplomacy and so on and so forth. The debt trap diplomacy is actually a bit of a myth. China is supplying public goods to the world now in clean tech. America has just, by the way, walked out of the energy transition. If you're in Africa, if you're in Latin America, if you're in the Middle East and you want clean tech, you're going to go to China, right? So this is the way that China, and it used to be this. It's in the Cold War. We were talking about war of hearts and minds. China is winning substantially that war of hearts and minds against the United States in the developing world, and it's an important trend.
In trying to analyse the competition between the US and China in the tech space, I think maybe the mainstream wisdom has been that the US has dominated artificial intelligence, but that China's well ahead when it comes to clean technologies. Is that right? Well,
according to ASPE, China is ahead in 47, what's the number, 47 to 51 technologies that are going to make the 21st century. On AI, I was in China quite recently. In fact, I was there on April the 2nd, Liberation Day, and people pretty much shrugged it off. And one of the reasons is that they're getting their mojo back, and part of that is DeepSeek, right? Yeah. So this was a David and Goliath story, right? So all the big tech giants in Silicon Valley, they're spending $1 billion and more on large language models. This little sort of plucky startup from Hangzhou comes along, operating out of a small apartment. They come up with a model that's not bad, and now you've got all these intelligent agents, these apps, and Manus is one of them. Everybody is on their phone playing with this. The Chinese are great at adopting, industry is great at adopting technology, and they're now integrating this immediately into production.
Finally, and I realise this might be a difficult ask, but can you shake the magic 8 ball for us? At the end of the century, when you think about the contest between the US and China, how do you see it sitting?
So I think on the tech side, it's all to play for. The US has deep capital markets, unmatched venture capital industry. That funds a great deal of innovation. It gives the United States global power and respect. China is the manufacturing superpower. As I said earlier, I think that from that base, China now starts to develop technologies. And we've seen in sector after sector, China is either catching up with the United States or has drawn level with the United States, and in many cases is pulling away. I wouldn't count the United States out. I wouldn't count the innovation, the ingenuity of American tech companies, but neither would I dismiss the challenge from China. They are very, very focused, and they have a system which works extremely well for them. Everybody got that wrong.